Which brings me to this piece that I mentioned early on in the first hour by Kevin Williamson. I'm a fan of Kevin's. He writes at National Review. And he wrote this piece called The Case for a Little Sedition. The Bundy standoff reminds us that government is our servant, not our master. No, I'm not promoting riots here, but I want you to listen to what the man says because he's right. He says, a great deal of the discussion about the Cliven-Bundy standoff in Nevada has focused on the legal questions, the litigation between Mr. Bundy and the BLM, various legal rationales and so forth. But that's largely beside the point. He says, of course the law is against Cliven-Bundy. How could it be otherwise? The law was against Mahatma Gandhi when he was tried for sedition. And Mr. Gandhi himself habitually was among the first to acknowledge that fact, refusing to even offer a defense in his sedition case and arguing the judge had no choice but to resign in protest of the perfectly legal injustice unfolding in his courtroom, or to sentence him to the harshest sentence possible, there being no extenuating circumstances for Mr. Gandhi's intentional violation of the law. Henry David Thoreau was happy to spend his time in jail, knowing the law was against him, whatever side justice was on. But not all dissidents are content to submit to what we in the age of Obama still insist on quaintly calling the rule of law. And there's a price to pay for that, too. King George not only would have been well within his legal rights to hang every one of this nation's seditious founding fathers, he would have been duty-bound to do so, the keeping of the civil peace being the first responsibility of the civil authority. Every fugitive slave and every one of these sainted men and women who harbored and enabled them was a lawbreaker. And who can blame them if none was content to submit to what passed for justice among the slavers? The situation was less dramatic during the government shutdown, but every one of the veterans and cheesed-off citizens who disregarded Obama's political theater and pushed aside his barricades was a lawbreaker, too, and bless them for being that. Harry Reid, apparently eager for somebody to play the role of General Dyer in this civil disobedience drama, promises this isn't over. And in a sense, it can't be over. The theory of modern government is fundamentally Hobbesian in its insistence that where political obedience is demanded, that demand must be satisfied lest we regress. I myself am of the view that there's a great deal of real estate between complete submission and civil war, and that acts such as Mr. Bundy's are not only bearable in a free republic, but positively salubrious. And I happen to agree. Unhappily, those views are not shared by many in Washington, and if I were a wagering sort, my money would be on Mr. Bundy ending up, well, I won't say, in prison or something else, he says. Now, Mahatma Gandhi and George Washington both were British subjects who believed that their legal situation was at odds with something deeper and more meaningful, and that the British were a legal authority but an alien power. Mr. Bundy is tapping into a long-standing tendency in the American West to view the federal government as a creature of the Eastern establishment, with political and economic interests that are inimical to those of the West and its people. And it isn't as though there is no evidence supporting that suspicion. The federal government controls 87% of the land in Nevada, something that would be unheard of in any state east of Colorado. Uncle Sam owns less than 1% of the land in New York, 1% of Maine, less than 1% of Rhode Island, less than 1% of Connecticut, but nearly half of New Mexico and Arizona, more than half of Utah and Idaho, and is practically a monopolist in Nevada. And a monopolist is rarely a good and honest negotiating partner. The original sagebrush rebels objected to conservation rules written by Eastern environmentalists who'd never so much as set foot in the lands they were disposing of. A century and some later, people travel more, but the underlying dynamic is the same. But there's a more important question here. Is government our servant, or is it our master? The left has long ago answered that question to the satisfaction of its partisans, who are happy to be serfs so long as their birth control is subsidized. But the right always struggles with that question, as it must. The thing that conservatives seek to conserve is the American order, which, one, insists that we are to be governed by laws rather than men, and two, was born in a violent revolution. Russell Kirk described the conservative idea as ordered liberty, and that is indeed what we must aim for, keeping in mind that it is order that serves liberty, not the other way around. And it is the government that exists at the sufferance of the people including such irascible ones as Mr. Bundy, not the other way around. If the conservatives in official Washington want to do something other than stand by and look impotent, they might consider pressing for legislation that would oblige the federal government to divest itself of 1% of its land and other real estate each year for the foreseeable future through an open auction process. I agree with that. Even the Obama administration has identified a very large portfolio of office buildings and other federal holdings that are unused or underused. By some estimates, superfluous federal holdings amount to trillions of dollars in value. Surely not every inch of that 87% in Nevada under the absentee landlordship of the federal government is critical to the national interests. Perhaps Mr. Bundy would like to buy some land where he can graze his cattle. Prudential measures do not solve questions of principle. So where does that leave us with our judgment of the Nevada insurrection? Perhaps with an understanding that while Mr. Bundy's stand should not be construed as a general template for civil action, it is nonetheless the case that in measured doses, a little sedition is an excellent thing. Kevin Williamson, correspondent, National Review. That's an excellent piece. And I think it sums it up for a lot of us. Or at least in part it does.